Welcome to the Creative Condition Podcast, the show where I, Ben Talon, illustrator and writer, invite people from the creative industry and far beyond to share their story of creativity. Both the nature and the nurture, the chaos and the calm. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, something I'm increasingly fascinated by and so often misunderstood. So little by little, I hope to build an archive of fascinating stories, experiences and tips to help you maximise yours. The show is supported by Illustration X. Go and take a look at their incredible global range of illustration and animation portfolios now at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, go and listen to Dirty Freud over on Spotify and all good music platforms now. Today I'm talking to design legend Stefan Sagmeister, who is back with his brand new book for Phaidon, Now is Better. It's a wonderful blast of positivity and welcome perspective in an era of doom, gloom and social media grandstanding.
There really is a completely different way to look at the world that basically shows the exact opposite and very, very much would have any rational human being come to the conclusion that it is actually best to be alive now, better than at any other time in human history.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is The Creative Condition. I am your host, Ben Talon. How are you doing? I hope you're well. I hope you're feeling engaged, energised and creative. As we edge into these slightly darker nights, I'm feeling a lot better this time than I did last year. This book is one of the reasons why I'm feeling better. There's been a kind of serendipitous sequence of shifts in perspective that I've had in thought processes and not getting caught in doom scrolling and reactive fight or flight instinctive responses, which I could talk all day about, but I'm not going to because I've been writing extensively in the Creative Condition book about this, about how best to word this, about managing the mind, I guess, and understanding why we often feel so alarmed and so panicked and like there's no point in a lot of things, including our creativity, when we see certain news headlines and world events. But it's not the time and place to go on about this because I've got an absolute industry legend on the show today. So Stefan has been prominent in the game, I guess, from the early 90s. So he formed New York-based Sagmeister Inc. in 1993 and has since designed for clients as diverse as the Guggenheim Museum and the Rolling Stones and HBO, and his work is in museum collections around the world. MoMA, Philadelphia Museum of Art, Art Institute of Chicago, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. He teaches now in the graduate department at the School of Visual Arts in New York, and he's not shy of a bit of controversy either and a bit of explosive, impactful, bold design. I remember coming across a hand lettering book in university in around 2004, and it featured the infamous poster into which Stefan cut with a scalpel into his own torso the details for a talk he was giving. I'm being quite wowed by that and wanting to know more about this character. And what's brilliant about Stefan, though, it isn't all about the shock. It's about thoughtful, considered, brilliant design. He's earned his place among design royalty. And what's quite funny is when you start to describe graphic designers and illustrators as, famous or household names, it very quickly falls flat when you get outside of our industry, save for a few people who might have come across them for whatever reason. And that's been the case, so I got very excited and I've been on the dog walk going, I just interviewed Stefan Sagmeister, and people are like, who? And you remember that it's this quite secular industry, but I don't care because it's ours and it's beautiful and creativity is awesome, and to get to talk to someone as creative as Stefan was an utter joy for me. But onto his book, so a quick thank you, like I said at the top of the show, for the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. been with me since day one in 2016, and interviews like this wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the vision of Harry Lyons-Smith in suggesting that I could do podcasting and supporting me all the way. So big thank you to those guys. Go and check out their awesome roster of artist portfolios at illustrationx.com now. But now is better. That's the sentiment and the title of this book by Phaidon, Stefan's latest book. Like I said, I got myself quite into the state with the fatigue of early parenthood last year. I don't know if I was quite depressed. I don't think I got there, but I felt very panicked and paranoid and deflated a lot of the time, and it was very tangible in my mood. And I'm, like Stefan will discuss today, we share quite an optimistic baseline personality. So I wanted to get in the ring and scrap this one out with Stefan and talk about positivity and long-term thinking, which is very much the foundation of his latest work in this book. So I'm going to read the information on the book for you to give you a sense of what we're going to be discussing today. So the book is beautiful. It's hardback. It's full of stunning visuals and fascinating statistics about the passage of time and why most things are better now than they ever have been. In the book, Stefan doesn't shy away from the fact that the climate crisis is pressing and urgent and terrifying, and that we need to address that now. But his point, and it was reflective of my own shift in thinking, was that ultimately we have to fight to maintain a positive mindset and an engaged, curious, creative one, because we are so much better when we do. So Phaidon is pleased to publish Now is Better, a beautifully fact-driven exploration of human progress throughout the ages, which urges its audience to choose gratitude and positivity over pessimism and despair. The body of work continues Sagmeister's lifelong preoccupation with how design can touch people's hearts and improve their lives. Initially conceived in 2020 as the world entered a global pandemic, Now is Better looks at the quality of life issues through collected statistics and information, revealing that, despite how we may feel on a day-to-day basis, things are much better now than they used to be, inspiring us to think about the future with much needed hope. Combining art, design, history and quantitative analysis, Sagmeister engages the reader by cleverly transforming data sets into stunning artworks. The visualized data is shown inlaid into 19th century oil paintings, embroidered onto canvases, or transformed into dynamic lenticular prints and hand-painted tableware, many of which have been exhibited in galleries around the world. Pops of primary colours, dazzling geometric overlays and optical illusions help bring encouraging statistics to life, with every artwork further explained by an accompanying caption and additional information in the end matter. It's brilliant. So visually it's so simple, so strong and so provocative, so thought-provoking I should say. But the nuances and the details and the stats are just uplifting, and it's going to sit on my coffee table for years to come for my kids to access, because it's just such a great idea. Stefan tells it better than I do, so we're going to get to it. I've rambled long enough, but it was a joy to have him on the show. I urge you to buy the book, not out of any cheap plug for Phaidon, even though they have been wonderful to me in terms of getting this podcast up and running, but it's just a beautiful thing, like all of Phaidon's books. I'm going to be talking to Julia Harding on a future episode of the show, which I'm equally excited about her work as a creative director with Phaidon as they enter their 100th year. Again, just mind-blowing stuff. Big thank you again to sponsor the show, Illustration X. Check them out, illustrationx.com. Big thank you to Stefan for taking the time, and a huge thank you to Phaidon for doing this. And also big thanks to Kelly Causden, who was recently on the show of Metal and Dust, who also knows Stefan and was influential in getting me on their radar. So it always takes a lot of people to make great creativity happen, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Stefan Sagmeister. But first of all, the book is fantastic, and thank you for
thank you
for such a timely body of work. I mean, for me personally, but also I think for everyone who's going to read it, I think it's you've hit the nail on the head on so many levels. Yeah,
I appreciate it.
I thought we could just start with the title. It's a fantastic title, first and foremost, because I think it works both ways. There's, of course, this is comparing, statistically, the current state of affairs on many, many levels, health and all kinds of things with the past. But I also felt like it's a mantra to the future, and I guess mindfulness and about now in every respect. Would that be right?
Absolutely, 100%. Yes, yes, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it for me it was just absolutely fascinating, these two different ways that you could look at human development or look at the world in general, like, from a very sort of like short-term point of view, where almost everything looks terrible, which is of course what most news organizations concentrate on for many, many reasons. And then there is this long-term view where that gives you literally the opposite kind of view of the world. And both of those views are correct. Like, none of them is lying, but because of certain human conditions, and we can get into them in detail, the short term seems to be much, 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 much more prevalent. And many of the people that I talk to and know, including my friends, wind up getting a view of the world that's really pessimistic and doom and gloomy, when there really is a completely different way to look at the world that basically shows the exact opposite, and very, very much would have any rational human being come to the conclusion that it is actually best to be alive now, better than at any other time in human history.
I think you're absolutely right, and I had this conversation recently where I was talking to my wife and I looked back at, through a book that I'm writing myself on creativity. I was looking back on various points in history, and in every instance, I came away saying, how fortunate am I to have been born at this time? I have two young twins who are 3 years old. I don't have to worry about them getting a horrible illness that's within reason, of course. There's always risk, but I'm in my back garden in a studio doing design for a living, and no one's trying to blow up my shed. And I think you're right on so many levels. And was this an idea, a sentiment that you tuned into for a while? Because I know in the book you tell the story of the dinner and the guy telling you the story, that then triggered some personal research. But this must have been a longer term sentiment that you were aware of.
Well, I think that in general, and I have some evidence for that, I think in general, I was born as a quite optimistic person. I think that there was, the reason that I say that is because I discovered old audio tapes of mine when I was 6 or 7 years old. And the sound of that voice is just so forward-looking and exciting that I don't remember that boy. Like, I have very, very few memories of me as a 6-year-old, but I would think, so I think that I'm predisposed for it.
Mm-hmm.
But then, and of course, we made in the past sort of like fairly large multi-year projects that already went into some sort of positivity. Like, we did a film and an exhibition on happiness. We did a large exhibition and a book on beauty. So, meaning there's definitely, a starting line developing there. But I would say the real beginning can be traced back to my time at the American Academy in Rome, because it was this fantastic combination of being able to have a salon-like dinner every night and having time on my hand to really, think about what I want to do in the next couple of years. And this, meaning I can tell the story very quickly. On one of these dinners, I sat next to a very smart lawyer who was the husband of one of the resident artists. And he told me that what we are seeing right now in Hungary, in Poland, in Brazil, really means the end of modern democracy. And because I had the time on my hand, I actually just looked it up after dinner. I went back to the studio and I just checked. So what's the story with modern democracy? When did it start? Where are we now? And it turned out that, it was basically, if you go back 200 years, there was a single democratic country, the United States. And then as you went for 100 years, there were, I think, 16 or 17, in 1920. And now we have 86, 87. So we are actually living in the single most democratic times in the history of the earth. It never before have more than half of all humanity lived in a democratic system. And that seemed fascinating to me, that this highly educated, smart, very well informed guy could be so incredibly wrong about the world that he lives in. Mm-hmm. And this is not just an idle thought, because the decisions that this person is making are very much informed by the doom and gloom he thinks that he's living in. And, let's say on a political level, a person like Trump is only possible if you think that absolutely everything is terrible and things were much better before. Meaning his entire slogan is "Make America Great Again," meaning that it's not great right now, but it was much better in the future. Well, if you just look at this single thought for a second, well, was it better 10 years ago? Well, it couldn't have been, because Obama was in charge. Was it better 20 years ago? Well, there was 9/11. We started the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. Was it better 50 years ago? Couldn't have been, because Reagan was in charge, and Reagan ran under the same line, "Make America Great Again," because Trump stole it from Reagan. Was it better 100 years ago? No, actually, it was the gigantic recession, and everybody was shit poor. So the whole thing is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But because certain human conditions, we tend to think our bad memories from the past fade faster than our first memories, because of the amygdala that alerts us or makes dramatic things that happen fast, like scandals, catastrophes, accidents, much more in our foreground, that they come much more into our foreground than positive things that tend to develop very, very slowly and become better very, very slowly. And there's a couple of other reasons too, that we just all, including myself, kind of favor negative things over positive things. And so this whole project, or all of the pieces in it, and of course the book itself, is sort of an attempt to just bring the other view onto the foreground. I'm extremely aware that the news will never change. The news basically, they deliver to us what we like to. And I myself much more read about the latest, much more likely will be pleased to read about the latest Trump fuck up than I would about a good thing that Biden just did.
Yeah.
Even though you could argue that this is my project, meaning my old client and acquaintance David Byrne has this fantastic blog news organization out called Reasons to Be Cheerful, which is a properly researched small organization, but he pays significant money to basically put some positive news on. I'm of course following it, but I have to admit I read it very rarely. It's on a daily basis. It's I think we all love drama.
We do, and you're absolutely right. And I've been researching this myself, and for a combination of a personal law which is quite rare. I share the kind of baseline optimism with you. I grew up. I was fortunate to find this thing, the creativity and the arts and design, and which gave me great purpose and joy in more or less all my days. But then I had two young twins, so suddenly I'm exhausted and my defenses are a little lower, and then the news is quite dramatic. So a bunch of these things kind of ganged up on me, like the climate crisis and a number of things. But when I started to do the research to gain a better understanding of the way my brain was behaving, as in it would take one negative news headline and then the rest would just spiral, and it was like iron filings to a magnet. So it would pull in any other problem in my life and dump it all in there and go, oh my God, this is horrible. Once I started to research this, it's very much kind of almost primitive. So this goes back to, food scarcity, and we've evolved to be more attuned to alarming negative things in our surroundings, which is actually the reason we're still here, or one of the reasons, because that sensitivity to our surrounds has enabled us to keep surviving throughout history. And to the point of your book,
100%,
to keep improving. I think, it's unsustainable to be in that alarmist mindset, in the fight or flight instinct for any period of time. I'm a great believer in adversity as a great source of creativity in moderation. I think it's unsustainable to live in a high state of stress without that becoming a very negative thing. There was I think it was in the foreword, Steven Pinker wrote that we can't count on our intuitions to reflect reality. And I thought that gave great credence to the data, the large data aspect of this book, which I thought was fantastic. So I'd love to talk about the visual representation of the numbers and the importance of separating, I guess, our minds from our inner chimp, if that makes sense, to step away from those fight or flight instincts for a moment and do exactly what you did, which was take a step back and just do a little research, or maybe balance the alarming news story and take a little time to look for something better. Because I think as creative people, we have a high percentage of highly sensitive people in this industry. And if we don't recognize and learn to manage the brain in this way, we can find ourselves in some serious negative loops, which is very counterproductive to creativity.
Yeah. Well, I think that, sometimes I feel a friend, specifically a friend who is engaged in a movement or in some sort of activism, will tell me, you shouldn't really do that because it will make people complacent. You shouldn't point out all the positive things because then people won't be able to actually fight global warming or do something about the death of so many species. And I am actually convinced that it's the opposite. Let's say if I look at myself, I am so much more useful to my surroundings when I am in a positive environment than if I'm on a platform of doom and gloom. If I'm depressed, I'm not good for anything. I'm not good for myself, but I'm definitely not good for my friends and for my partner or for my neighbors. And if I looked and I did, what were the big social change campaigns of the past decades? One of course stood out, which would be the non-smoking campaign. Incredibly successful. Basically was able to reach, to in many countries cut the smoking population in half. If 80% were smoking, now it's 40%, and so on. So and if you look at how this worked, it's pretty much everywhere. It's the carrot and the stick that ultimately worked. There needed to be all the warnings about shit will happen to you if you continue to smoking. But there also needed to be the positive things like, oh, there's some very, very good benefits for you when, if this is happening. So I think that right now there is basically almost exclusively news media, with maybe a 5 or 10% exception, delivers the stick. And I think that this book is a tiny little attempt to also bring a little bit of the carrot into this mix.
Mm-hmm. And it very much had that effect on me, because I read the entire thing in a couple of days, and it's, like I said, it landed at a very personally resonant time when I'd managed to get back to a really good, positive state of mind by and large. And you're absolutely right. And that's what I was emphatically reminded, was that actually I was terrible when I was feeling low on a number of days, because I would just cut corners in my studio and I would sit there and I would find the easiest task to do, instead of maybe going out on my bike and finding some new surroundings and being empowered in my day to day. And creativity flow states, they happen when you're in that headspace.
Mm-hmm.
And this didn't, I had to tell myself, this doesn't mean that you're neglecting any of the problems in the world, but quite the opposite. You're coming to them with a fresh mindset. You're looking for positive ideas and solutions, instead of just looking at them and going, well, why bother? I feel like, I hope a lot of people get their hands on this, because I think it could have, really great impact on our industry, being so full of sensitive people, because it's so easy to go under those. But
it would be wonderful. I mean, that's basically, that really is the idea, because ultimately, I feel that communication design really is a language, and it's a very, very strong language. And many of us, including myself for a long time, used this language solely to do something advertising or promoting, which I think is fine. And I'm completely I have nothing against selling. My parents were salespeople. I'm completely on board with that. I also thought that, considering that this is a strong language, that I should give this a really good shot to try to basically say some other things outside of the world of promotion. And so in that vein, we did the exhibition and the book on beauty, which I think had very good resonances. And I've seen many indications of this actually being able to turn the dial a little bit. Where this whole idea that our world is just about functionality and has nothing to do with aesthetics is simply wrong. But and of course there is a similar desire, and we'll see how successful I'll be with it. It's I try to work these on as many levels as possible. Let's say, I mentioned to you, I'm just coming back from Mexico, so we had another exhibition with these paintings, with the lenticulars, with the embroideries opening there. But let's say we also have a poster block on the wall where visitors can rip a poster off and hang it up at home as a reminder that things are better. So, and I can tell you, at the opening, we had, I think the poster block was 500 posters. And after the opening, there were maybe after those 2 hours, there were maybe 100 left. Now, I don't think that all 400 who took the poster will actually hang it. I definitely signed as many posters, but it's one little technique. Or then I went to Bentonville in Arkansas, and there we opened a very large mural, eight stories high. And again, it's part of this Now is Better series. And, that mural will be up for decades. I mean, that's definitely how we designed it. And so I'm sure many people will just walk by it and say, oh, hopefully that's pretty. But then there is a large sign there that explains the whole thing. Mm-hmm. So again, it's just many different little spots of communication design that I can deal with. And of course, the book that's coming out this fall with Phaidon is one of those elements. Maybe probably the element for now that has the most information in it of all of the things that I can publish. Yeah.
And I think it's a wonderful medium because, I've read the PDF version as part of the press, but I kind of wait to get my hands on the physical copy. I want that to be prominent on my coffee table when my children hit their adolescent years, because I want them to see when they inevitably get their angst and they encounter social media for the first time. I want that to be the antidote, and I think that so I think it's another lovely permanent monument. And what I loved about it is the sheer immediacy of the visual direction, combined with the historic, the stretch of time and the labor of the work. I'd love to just touch upon the process, because I loved the images of the studio and the physical treatment of the artwork. So if you could give us a little
Sure.
insight to that.
So I think that the visual strategy that we applied most often to ultimately create these data visualizations that about long-term data, about things that have gone well, is one where I get paintings, 200-year-old paintings, and then basically cut these original paintings up and put new, today contemporarily manufactured inserts in there. So if I try to describe this, so you can imagine you have a 18th or 19th century painting, let's say, of a landscape. And it's a pretty landscape because beauty was very important at that time. And now you have set into this landscape flush a number of very, very glossy, very different surface, hard forms in color. And it almost looks like a combination between a minimalist painting and a 18th century landscape. But the minimalist painting part isn't really just an abstraction, it really is a data visualization. But you would have to, let's say in exhibitions, you would have to look that up. But the idea, there are booklets that basically explain every painting. But the idea really is that people also would buy this to hang in front of on their chimney or in front or above their couch as a sort of like more permanent reminder that things are not as bad as they might seem on X or on Twitter. And originally I got the first number of paintings from my great-great-granddad's lot, who had an antique store in Western Austria. And now I buy them at small auction houses in Central Europe, mostly Austria, Germany, Belgium, Holland. And I actually, just when I came back just now, I had a gigantic box from a auction house in Germany here, and I think I got 6 more paintings in. I photographed them here in the Manhattan studio and bring them then out to the studio in Brooklyn, where we have more of a manufacturing place where, it's more like a woodworking studio, because the process is actually pretty complex. Because when you take those 18th century paintings off the frame, parts of paint come off. When you wrap them and fold them differently because of our inserts, the stuff comes off. And we actually see, like, I designed the pieces digitally, and then we use the digital files to CNC the inserts and CNC a new frame that the painting is wrapped on. And then we, very much by hand, bend the paintings in, affix them onto the new background, put the fit very, very exactly, which is different from painting to painting because they're all in very different conditions. Some of them have doubled or 3 canvases, so they're all very individually treated. And at the end, we have a fantastic restorator who then basically restores the entire thing so that any chips, missing chips or so, will become invisible again.
Wow. And then how long are we talking as a process to for all the works that are in the book?
I think that the book really shows a time span of about 5 years, roughly. But I'm still like, I should say that I extremely enjoy the process. So I'm still working on new iterations. And, as we as a team also get much better at doing them, I think that they are the latest ones, I think, are more exactly going into the direction that I had envisioned from the beginning. We have now quite a huge contrast between the inserts and the historic paintings. And so I'm definitely making more. Also, meaning for one reason, because as I said, I enjoy the process, but I think there's also no shortage on the other side, on negative news. So I think that it makes sense to put more positivity there as a counterpoint. And I would say also, I think that important for me actually, and I know that that a good number of artists wouldn't care, but important for me is actually that they work, as in when we have exhibitions, they actually do sell, meaning which is pleasing on one hand, and it makes it also sustainable as a project. But I think just as important is that they really do hang. It's in somebody's home as a reminder. It's so that part is actually also quite important to me.
I think so, and I think there's an integrity there, and I think there's a love of, when you continue the work beyond the project, it speaks for itself that it's making you feel good, and there's worth in this project. You mentioned that you're quite a naturally optimistic person, and I think I heard one of the better descriptions of confidence that I heard recently was the brain's ability to predict a positive outcome. Because there's this misconception with, I think within design and the creative industries, we like to put people on pedestals, and I think it's safe to say you've earned your reputation as a long-standing designer, and a very good one. Thinking back to a time before you found your own breaks in the industry, would you say that optimism helped you to build that confidence before you had the tangible projects to say that you were a good designer?
Yes, I would say so. Meaning, I'd say that my desire, even as a student, was always to do the best possible work that I can do at that time. And I can't say that I did that always, because sometimes I was also lazy and sometimes I just didn't have the energy or so. But I definitely remember instances. Let's say I very well remember when we did our first book, the Made You Look. We worked on it forever and ever and ever. And at the end of it, I remember thinking, I have no idea if this book, I really didn't know, I have no idea if this book is any good. But it's as good, I know that it's as good as I can make it. And there is no, I now don't know how to make it better. And I think that is ultimately all you can do. There might be other people out there more talented, with more resources, smarter, better looking, whatever, that can do a better thing than you or than me. But I think if I can go to that edge where I know, okay, this is how good I can make it right now, and I don't know how to make it better, I think that's really all I can do.
I think that's it, and because the reason I ask is there's such almost a rallying cry in this project for a shift in mindset away from doom and gloom, and I'm a huge believer that looking after the mind and looking after our confidence, and also seeing it as something that we can better, that we can understand our brain and we can take better control of how we feel. By doing that as designers and creative professionals, I believe that you generate your own confidence. Now, of course, as you produce more good work for commercial clients, then you become more confident because of those previous results. Mm-hmm. But not everyone has those previous results to go on, and that's why I think there needs to be a great importance on finding ways to feel impassioned, to feel good. Because speaking personally, every stylistic advancement or breakthrough, it came in a great time of wonder. I felt wonder in the world, and I felt excitement about what I was doing. Invariably, the work that I struggled with, it's because I couldn't find flow, or I felt down, or whatever the reasons were. And I just think there needs to be such an importance now as creative professionals on managing the mind and being very aware of the role of, the dark news stories and everything else. And I just think it all ties in with what you're doing here.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I would sign off on that line every time. No, absolutely.
Mm. One bit that I thought was fantastic was it was how you described the smartphone, and when you listed all of the things that it's replaced in terms of consumerism and materials, it did make me laugh because I think my mother-in-law still has each of those individual items.
Yes. Yeah.
The Rolodex and the landline, and but that gave me a great lift because there's I might have been guilty of looking at smartphones and going, oh my God, people are wasting their time on social media and its energy use. That I'd never considered all the things they had replaced. So that individual statistic was profound in its own right.
Well, I mean, that came out of, actually numbers from the UK. I think those numbers are only really available, or that's the only country where I found them, where it shows that we are now using about a third less stuff. Like the average person in the UK now uses 10 tons of things a year, which is still an incredible amount, but it's down from 15 tons a year. And that is partially true because we just through digitization, we just don't need that many things anymore. And I think another role there for sure played that this idea to own that many things, I think, is losing its power through the younger generation. If I look at my nephews and nieces, they have much less interest in driving big cars, in owning this and that, than, let's say, my generation had. So I think that there is also definitely some bright light there for sure.
Without a doubt. And how do you feel about nostalgia in particular in design? I think we have to be careful. I think I talked to Andy Sandoz, who was the president of D&AD when I talked to him at the time, and he was very positive about technology, and his comments were along the lines of, you don't have to use any of the new tools, whether that's artificial intelligence or know how to code, but you have to be aware of them and you have to factor them into your decision making as creative professionals, which I thought was a great way to put it. But he felt like things could be more provocative, more dangerous, because we have access to all of human history now through the phones in our pockets. And his question was, where is the banshee whale? He felt that we were falling back on nostalgia too much, given that we have access to all of it. And he felt like it was coming out in the design world as, nostalgic and repetition. Do you feel that way, or do you feel more positive about where we're headed?
I mean, look, I think that design in general was always influenced by technology, meaning starting with the serifs of the Roman typeface that came came out of the tool that the typeface was made for, to the reaction to Gutenberg's printing press, to the digitalization. It basically, the design was always pushed forward ultimately by technology. And I think that we are now, of course, at another gigantic cusp where I'm sure much of this technology that we are now starting to get access, like AI, will in the beginning create an incredible amount of problems because we don't quite know. We know some of the pitfalls that it brings, and I think some of these pitfalls we will ignore, and some of them we hopefully take care of. But the ones that we ignore will definitely create trouble. But I feel that in general, the technologies, and I think that the book is a good reminder of that. If you look back, the technologies that we invented were by and large, if you look at history, more often used for something positive than something negative. There were more houses built with a hammer than people killed with the hammer. And I feel that ultimately we will go in a very similar direction once we can overcome the problems that AI generates. We will ultimately have a positive outcome. Look, I think that basically any move forward, any development, any human innovation will have side effects, and some of them or many of them, we basically have to fight those side effects, take care of them, overcome them before progress can go forward again.
Mm. So you've got, I'm a big believer in, and you hit upon this, but the power of visual communication is huge, particularly in the way people consume the world around them now through technology. You've got some fantastic projects that speak to this. In particular, I loved the Move Our Money project, and I adored the Tunnels of Toronto, and I felt like they both just showed the two very different case studies of the power of visual communication. With the problems we face in the world today, the climate crisis and the likes, do you still believe that us as creative professionals have a major role to play in pushing things the right way?
I mean, ultimately, I don't really believe that, let's say, designers have a bigger responsibility to better the world than any other profession does. I think that, like in my case, I think that we as citizens have some sort of responsibility. And I think not just a responsibility, I think that there is also a desire in us. Meaning I definitely, without any doubt, have a desire to create. Like I can't sit on the couch, watch Netflix every day, all day long. I just can't. It's not possible. And so with this desire to create something, to change something, to do something, of course, it is much more satisfying to be able to look at an aspect that has meaning. And in my case, I felt that I should be doing something that another designer is not doing. That was the case with beauty, meaning that if there would have been other design groups out there who were creating exhibitions on beauty, and I said, okay, then fine. I think that is, somebody's already doing that. It doesn't need me to do that. And very similar with this subject of long-term thinking. Now, of course, there are people out there who very, very smartly and intelligently work and push long-term thinking. There is a fantastic group out in California called the Society of the Long Now with Stuart Braund, and I think your very own Brian Eno is part of this. And they are making large projects, I think most significantly a 10,000-year-old clock to bring home or to sort of like manifest a more long-term thinking as a pilgrim site for humanity. But I'm not aware of anybody else that does this in the world of communication design. So I thought, well, that's I think makes sense for me to do. It has some meaning. And that, of course, is also from a process point of view extremely helpful, because most of the projects that I'm dealing with at one time are in trouble. Like, there is a point at one time when, I don't know, I'm stuck with the idea. There is whatever, not enough budget, not enough time. There is this didn't come out as I hoped for, and so on. So there is, in almost any, it's the rare project that stays completely trouble-free. And in those times when it's troublesome, it's helpful if the project is meaningful, because it helps me very, very well to get over the troubled times. Because if I think this project doesn't really have meaning, then I might give up on it. I might just say, you know what, this is just too much trouble for that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that's really, I would say, the main reason.
Yeah. And I think that meaningful is completely subjective and individual, isn't it? I think there's a risk that we often look to the sharp end of things. So, when someone says activism, the brain kind of often thinks of placards and big marches, but it can be the tiniest, most quirky little project that means something to you. But I think if it lights you up inside, the chances are that it's going to resonate through the work with somebody else. And I think that's worth remembering.
Yeah. Meaning, I found that my whole being is mainstream enough that if I do something that I think, actually, I quite like this, I think that this is a good direction, I like it myself, I find that other people do so too.
I think you're right. And you know what? It took me a good few years to realize it. But after a while, I always had an itch to work way beyond illustration. That's what I'm known for. That's my day job. And I love it. But it's taken me far and wide into all these wonderful other creative fields. And what I came to realize over the years, and this applies to many, maybe everyone, but the way I talk on this podcast, the way that I write in fiction, the way I write in nonfiction, the way I draw, they all come from the same creativity, from the same voice. And I think that just opens up doors. And I think that's, it's really, really valuable. And I think I read it in your interview with Kelly Corzon, because I had Kelly on the show recently. Mm-hmm. And I think you said I wouldn't worry much about developing a signature style, since it's much more difficult to get rid of than develop. And I thought that was fantastic. And my word, I've seen some of the best people out there hit the finite part of what they're doing, but continue into a series of diminishing returns because they've maybe hold themselves up too much, and that is a real risk, isn't it?
100%, absolutely. And but even in there, I sort of over the years changed my opinion somewhat. Like when I was a very young designer, I literally thought that every project needs to be done in a new formal expression and a new style. And it turned out that was just not possible. Like that if you really wanted to keep that up, you wound up stealing from history. Like, you did Art Deco yesterday and whatever, 50s bubblegum the day before, or you wound up even worse stealing from other designers. Mm-hmm. So once I realized that, I allowed myself more to repeat certain stylistic or formal elements. And with that, and I think with age, and it could be that it's also an excuse. So I'm not 100% sure, but I think with age, I also got to really enjoy the artists or designers who stayed the same all their lives. Let's say I'm a big fan of James Turrell, and meaning he's been working with light all his life, but not only that, he's basically been creating the same skyscape, like that room with a opening for the sky that you really watch the sky. He's been doing rooms like this, I think, for 40 years. But they get better and better and better. Now, if I see one, if I say, oh, there's a skyscape of James Turrell in that town, I look up at what time at what year it's been built, because I only want to see new ones. I don't really like the old ones anymore, having been in a whole bunch of new ones. So I'm super happy that he stayed with it. Or maybe Bob Dylan would be another example where you're just kind of happy that they didn't, obviously they all had stylistic changes. Super, like a 50-year-old Dylan song is different from a song now. But in general, the overall gestalt kind of, stayed similar. And so, which is also really the reason that I'm very happily, right after this podcast, I probably go back and design new historic inserts for historic paintings for a couple of hours, even though I've done that already 4 years ago. But I think that I can do a better job now than I did 4 years ago. The forms are more complex, the colors are more sophisticated, the finishing or the ultimately the production is more precise. Which for sure 100% I would not have allowed myself to do when I was 25.
I think it's one of the things that I love most about your work is that the lack of fear to move between things. But I also wanted to ask, you're very clear about saying you're a designer, and has that helped in your career trajectory to first have that the innermost confidence in that's primarily what you're doing?
Ultimately, the biggest difference between design and art would probably be one of functionality.
Mm-hmm.
That design really has to work, art really does not. It can just be. Or at least art as we see it in the 21st century. Art, of course, when you look at it historically, had a lot of functionality. Like, if you look at the art that was produced in the Renaissance, it had to do all sorts of things. Praise God, make the king look very good, be decorative in some summer palace for the Medicis, whatnot. So, but right now I think that art can just be. Design has to work, and there is a fantastic little paragraph in an Adorno book where he talks about that difference between functionality and non-functionality. And he says that ultimately there is no such thing as 100% non-functionality, because even the least functioning piece of artwork, let's say the art from the 60s where they really didn't want to have any functionality, let's say Sol Levitt or so, where it literally was just about this can be, even that, of course, has functionality. It can be used as a commodity to trade something. It can be used for money laundering. It can be used as a background for your selfie, and also all of these things. But on the other side, there is no such thing as 100% functionality, because even the most engineered piece ultimately is a little bit informed by ideas like, I don't know, transparency or so, that come from the non-functioning world. So if you accept this sort of Adorno explanation, that means that all of the work, both of the designers and the artists, are just on this moving scale between functionality and non-functionality. And I think that I myself, as a designer, always tended to be on the more non-functioning side. Like, even album covers are not the most functional thing. So they're definitely much less functional than, let's say, I don't know, text forms. And even though, the design of a text form is something culturally very important and would be a fantastic job, but it's on the more functioning side of a usual design studio. And what we're doing now is probably, on the very little functioning side. It's also interesting when you look at the audience or as a whole, we tend to prefer people who make non-functioning things and put more praise on them. Let's say the person who builds the cathedral is more famous than the person who builds the factory.
Yeah.
Well, having, no toilet, no kitchen, no meeting rooms, being really not a very functioning kind of building. But if I talk to architects, even the ones who are not spiritual at all, they love building a cathedral or a chapel. Mm-hmm. Love that much more so over than something that has to have a lot of functionality. Yeah. And the same is true really for graphics. I mean, I think in the book I use that example. Many of us will know who designed the music magazine article in all dingbats, completely non-functioning.
Yeah.
But very few actually will know who designed the UK tax form. Yeah. Even though, if we look at it from a rational point of view, the design of the UK tax form is a much more important job than some page in a music magazine.
Mm-hmm. I had a book at university called About Face, and it went deep into the science of all the road signs and the transport and the motorways, and I found it fascinating. Yeah. But again, can't remember a single name, but I know you're talking about David Carson, so you highlight he won.
Yeah. Totally. It's I think that ultimately we as humans love to get up higher on that pyramid of Maslow and enjoy things that have low functionality. I think this was the case in churches, and they have now been taken over by museums. I think we are attracted by this idea that you go into a museum and it doesn't really do much, but there is an incredible amount of effort, money, space has been put aside for something that doesn't have to do a lot. I think we ultimately find that space, it allows us to contemplate. It rips us out from our daily functioning path, and let's say I've also used the example. If you look at a commute, it's a very highly functioning way to go from A to B because it's you really have to go to work. But if you look at a walk in the park, you might just wander around. The functionality is super low, but it's so much more enjoyable.
Yeah. And I think it speaks to our innate need to see life as something other than just problem solving.
Yes, exactly.
Because they're the bits we remember, and that's what stays with us.
Yeah. And I think that, all of the designers who really see themselves as pure problem solvers, I think have the problem that the problems that we usually solve in design are so easy that there is some sort of laziness in that pure problem solving. That it is just much, much, much more difficult to design a beautiful drinking glass than it is to design a functioning drinking glass. Meaning a functioning drinking glass is basically, it's so easy because you know what the circumvent for the opening should be, you know roughly how big or how much water it should contain. It's one of the easiest things in the world. You and I could probably design a couple of dozen before noon to design a beautiful drinking glass that is current in its design, meaning it has something to say about 2023. It's a very difficult task because you're fighting against 2,000 years of glass history. Mm-hmm. You really, and it's funny because I actually have a 2,000-year-old glass right here. So it's that's a totally much more difficult task.
Yeah, and
To-
I think it's one that you've very successfully pulled off with this book on many levels, because it's just, you know, the all of it, the page design, everything. It was such an easy read in the best way. You know, the art was beautiful on an aesthetic level. The functionality was very admirable with the way you've represented all the data in those in the I've forgotten the words you used, but the color
yeah,
sections when in
yeah.
each word. But then even down to the breakdowns of the data in the columns, you know, it works as a piece of functional and a really beautiful piece of design. So and I wanted to ask about the lettering. What did you create the lettering with?
That's it. Basically, it's the simulated molten tin. So basically, we digitally heated up tin and let it freely flow so that it would basically almost find like I did design in ink sort of a template, but then the thing really found its own way and hardened in its own way, but it did so digitally, like, you know, with a lot of physicality being involved in that. Yeah, it's uh, that's just a little side thing for the cover headline, but also for all of the chapter headlines.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, to promote the podcast, we early on, I had a 3D print commissioned and I created this whole set and built on it and around it. And but it reminded me of the kind of digital representation of the 3D print scan. It had that kind of ragged feel to it almost.
Yes,
And
yes. Yeah,
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 it's
yeah.
great. It looks fantastic, by the way. It looks good. So the last thing I wanted to touch upon, which I think is very important for our world, our information overload world today, was your belief in the power of sabbaticals and time off. And I recently interviewed the editor of Idler magazine. I don't know if you've come across that in the UK. And Tom Hodgkinson, and it's a slower pace of life, and it's about fulfillment and about checking in with yourself to correct your course in life.
Mhm.
The sheer amount of information we're exposed to today, would you mind just giving us a little insight into your love of sabbaticals and why you take them and the time off?
Well, I had the first one came around really after 7 years, or I thought about doing one mostly because I felt the work was becoming repetitive, and I thought that I should use my time wisely. And I had all sorts of fears that now that the studio was established, we were going to be forgotten, that it will look, the first one was in the year 2000. So it was at the height of the internet, of the first internet boom. So I fear that it's going to look very professional when everybody else is making lots of money. We are closing for a year. And it turned out that my fears didn't come true at all, that we were not forgotten, that clients waited around for us. So all my assumptions like this were wrong. And that this year of not pursuing my regular jobs, at that point we had done mostly album covers, yielded an incredible amount of new directions and new thought processes that I could implement immediately afterwards when the studio was open again, mostly in that work that came out as things I've learned in my life so far, which were these sentences that I had learned and that we did as sometimes very large projects for clients. But that really was sort of like my first step into a direction. What can design do outside of the promotional world? And that was, quite a personal project then. That was incredibly satisfying to create. Was, I think, successful in the way that it put the studio on a track that differentiated it from other design studios, which paradoxically even turned out financially well, because then once we were not really comparable, we weren't also really in these price fights with other design studios. But this was not something that I had planned. This was, a complete unexpected side effect. And it was not only pleasurable, but I also felt that it was a great strategy to remain in design as being a calling rather than just looking at it as a job. And once I realized that, it became clear that, I'm going to do a second one for sure in another 7 years. And then that was also worked out extremely well. In the second sabbatical, we started many things that we had not done before, like furniture, but also we started the Happy Film. It really was created then in the studio years afterwards, but started in the second sabbatical. And so it was also then very, very clear that it's going to be a third one, which really was the beginning of the beauty project. So, and I'm definitely going to do a fourth one, even though right now, basically everything that I'm working on right now is somehow connected to the Now is Better theme. So I'm already very, very much doing whatever I want to do. So we'll see how that influences the next sabbatical. But I'll definitely going to do one that's going to come up in fall next year. So it's actually quite close.
That's great, yeah, because also there's a difference. Even though you're working on your own work and it's completely autonomous, you still have to allow the unconscious to digest and to, regurgitate all the things that we put in our head, don't you? Otherwise, if it's, regardless of whether it's commercial or not, if you don't give that part of your brain the chance to produce, then there's truly great ideas that are going to take you into your next echelon that are not going to happen.
Yeah. So, looking I just wanted to say, looking very much forward. If I'm honest, no, it's like by now I think I can't even say that I'm looking very much forward to the next sabbatical. It's just integrated. It's integrated in my work life, and it's going to be fine. It's going to be good.
Yeah, and I think when you see the world that way and you see your future that way, you make decisions to make it so.
Yeah. I think it's totally okay.
Brilliant. Well, this has been fantastic, and I thank you very much for your time. And
thank you so much for talking with me, Ben.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And again, congratulations on the book. Thank you for doing it, and I'm very excited to see what the response is going to be.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank yous to Fiden and to Stefan, of course, for taking the time out of his schedule promoting Now Is Better to have this conversation. Grab the book, it's beautiful. It's a reminder that Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it these days, is a bit of a cesspit, and it's not reflective of our reality, of our current situation. It can be useful, it can be good. I like the platform, but it takes some navigating these days. And it's much better to sit down with a cup of tea or a glass of whiskey and just take in this beautiful piece of work. So go and do it. It's out now. It's brilliant. Coming up, we've got Julia Harding, creative director of Fiden. I'm going to be talking about the broader theme of designing beautiful artistic books and about her role as creative director. It's a very exciting prospect for me. We've got the 200th episode coming up next with Jen Granneman. Very, very excited about that. She's an expert in sensitivity, and it is everything about the creative mind. So it just struck me as an ideal 200th episode, in tune with where this show has gone over time, been much more in the road of psychology and well-being and mindfulness and mental health as drivers of creativity. So I hope you like where the show is going in that regard. Please do get us your feedback. Big thank you if you've ever contributed to the show. You can really support by sharing and subscribing and reviewing. It would be most welcome, especially if you're a regular. Please do take out a few minutes to do that. And I'm going to be announcing the details very soon of a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter to get the book, the Creative Condition book, up and running. Very excited about that. Long way to go. It's written, it's edited, the cover is designed, and now it's going to be your chance to get your copy of the book. So more details on that. Keep an eye on me primarily on LinkedIn, also on Instagram. Drop me an email, hello@bentalon.com, or hit me on social at bentalon. Awesome, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this one with Stefan Sagmeister. Looking forward to the 200th episode. Have a great week. Stay creative.